That's all. Is there anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, I don't know whether it's something that will be helpful or not,
Cool.
but I think the things that really kind of get me down a bit about the whole, if you're looking at the bigger picture,
Yeah.
is the sort of postcode lottery aspect of treatment for people. That upsets me. Tracy did me an amazing favour when we first met. She put me in touch with all these groups on Facebook, which previously I just used as a social thing, and now is an absolute lifeline for being in touch with other parents who have kids with type 1. And you learn all these things, situations elsewhere in the country where it's really hard to get an insulin pump when it really shouldn't be. Like things like that, I kind of feel like the technology exists we have these sensors now, continuous glucose monitors. I don't understand why every kid isn't allowed to have one of those when you think about the complications that it should reduce in later life and the cost savings for the NHS. This is my political rant.
No, you go for it.
And when you hear, this is another type 2 thing here, but there's been loads in the news recently about bariatric surgery, right? Like stomach stapling and other things.
Yeah.
To try to reduce, the incidences of type 2 or the complications associated with it. And I just think that's fair enough, but there are so many fewer people with type 1, and loads of them are children, and the cost to the NHS relatively to give them all the latest technologies, like the things we have that we've managed to get hold of, that would be something that could be done and would be a drop in the ocean in comparison to thousands of people that they're talking about, helping with type 2. So things like that annoy me, and I think the DLA stuff annoys me as well. We've been really fortunate, but it's all down to how well you can express yourself on the form at a time when you're coping with a kid with a chronic illness. You may not be used to filling out forms. Why is there not a standard amount of money that people get for a kid who has type 1 diabetes? I don't understand it. It's a lottery. Some people get low rate, some people get middle, some people get high.
There's one other thing I wanted to ask you about. The reason for doing this film is that I did a run. I haven't told anyone this yet. I did a run before, which was to raise money for all the people who basically saved his life in hospital. There are different things we can do for type 1. We can try and raise some money. We can. Is that an indie check?
Sorry, I just had to see.
Yeah.
It wasn't.
No.
It wasn't.
The reason for doing it is that I know we're doing everything to give George good control. When he has poor control, it's incredibly emotionally traumatic. We should have talked about that. And I think that I feel immense guilt because I feel like I'm failing him, because ultimately it's me who's responsible.
Yeah.
Me and my wife. But me if it's just me caring for him. Or her if she's alone. And the guilt attached with that is some sort of chronic failure.
Yeah.
But you push and you push to make it harder. At the moment, because he is 3 years old, having poor control doesn't have such serious consequences beyond the immediacy of him having a crap time.
Yeah.
Bad days upon bad days.
Yeah.
I know that when he turns 10, the consequences for having poor control are cataclysmic. Blindness, loss of limbs, God knows how many other brutal things. So the reason for doing it is I'm thinking we've got about 7 years. We've got a lot less time for everyone else who's got it, but for a long time now people have been saying it's 5 years away, it's 5 years away.
Yeah.
The only way we're going to accelerate that is by telling as many people as we can, basically, and making it important.
Yeah.
What's it like for you? What's the emotional process of when Indy's been having a bad time? Because it isn't your fault. Often you're dealing against the elements almost. I mean, it's nothing to do with, you could be testing him every 5 minutes, but it still doesn't.
It's kind of soul destroying, or it can be when it's at its worst. In the early days when I was, frantic and exhausted, and every, we'd just be seeming to get it right, and then he'd get a random high number, and you'd just be feeling like, if you thought about it, it was something stupid you'd done or you hadn't, and you'd feel awfully responsible, and there is a part of me that I try to sort of compartmentalise or push it to one side, but there's always a bit of you that's thinking, oh well, I'm actively like destroying something there in his body by having let that happen.
Yeah.
And I think with time, and you kind of get to know the ebb and the flow of it, and the fact that sometimes there's things you just can't, it's beyond your control.
Yeah.
It gets a little bit easier, but it's a horrible thing, especially when it's a silly mistake or something that you may have made, but perhaps through chronic tiredness or something. And I think that's the thing. I'm not prepared. School's an interesting one, and I hear horror stories frequently about how people are cared for at school. At the moment, Indy has a brilliant nursery, and we've taught them through a hell of a lot of. Sorry.
That's right.
Indy's got an amazing nursery, and we've taken a lot of time to train them to basically give him as good a care as he has, as good care as he gets at home, with as tight control as possible, barring the odd thing that goes wrong here and there. And we're just, school is such another thing, and actually we're not getting good vibes at all from his older brother's school at the moment. The headmistress has suggested he go to a different school, which is something she shouldn't have said.
Wow.
And we're fighting it. She can't prevent him from going there, but the attitude doesn't bode well. So I feel like we're going to have a lot of extra fights along the way.
So the clock is ticking in every sense.
The clock is ticking. Yeah, we have a year before we start school to kind of get it sorted out. And I think it's my view as a mother, and I was a parent. People who are meant to look after him, say at school, are not doing as good a job as I expect. It's absolutely my interpretation of that is that they are actively damaging his health.
Yeah.
That's how I would view that, and it is not acceptable.
Yeah.
And I'd say there's just I foresee fighting ahead, which is which I'm prepared to do, and I have the time to do, but I could really do without.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing. It's such a relentless condition.
Yeah.
And yet there's so much additional
Yes.
work generated
Yeah.
for people trying to get the treatments they need, support they need at school, the benefits that they're entitled to, all of that stuff. And then, fighting the sort of, or pushing back against the prejudice or the ignorance of others on top. It's
Great. The last thing is that, thank you very much. It's really articulate. It's absolutely brilliant. The last thing is that Tracy for a long time went through a process of imagining the what if question, and what if he didn't have it.
really...
I've probably only done that but twice.
Yeah.
And it doesn't,
Doesn't help.
But just for the sake of things,
Yeah.
let's say everybody's going to spread the word. We're going to defeat this thing. We're going to conquer all, and we'll find a cure. Do you dare to dream about that? Do you dare to think what it'd be like?
I think I did it. Haven't really. No. I think it was more in the early days. I realised what we'd lost, and so I feel like it would be something we would gain again. And I think what that is a carefreeness that is no longer possible, in family life. And for Indy, it's a kind of devil may care. Oh, let's just go out with nothing apart from our keys and our, something. Or let's just rock up to a new restaurant that we've never been to. Let's take a chance and see if the kids. It's quite tricky, with fussy children and stuff. My children are quite bad about eating varied foods, as lots of children are, and you just can't. You always have to have a backup plan, with kids with type 1 and things like that. It's just always thinking, always being organised, always planning ahead, always.
Organised fun is not something a child wants to hear.
No.
Well, it goes against the very spirit of childhood, is what you're talking about. All of those things about freedom.
It's just the carefreeness, and it's funny. Indy has a packed lunch at nursery.
Right.
He's the only kid that has a packed lunch, and for us at the moment, it's the best way. You know, it's easiest. And I carb count everything in advance, and I write it on a little note, and then they know, and then they put it all into his pump at lunchtime. And my elder son doesn't have a packed lunch at school, but occasionally, like this week when he's been at football club, he does, and it's so bizarre. I find myself, it feels so weird not carb counting sometimes.
Yeah.
Do you know? And then you realise, I don't need to do that for the other one yet. Hopefully forever, but
Forever,
you never know.
yeah.
That's a worry.
It's a wonderful feeling. That I can remember doing Ava's formula, and of course, you know, whatever I would know, 6 scoops of formula works out at about 6 carbs for one specific brand of formula milk. And I spilt a bit of the scoop, and I had this dreadful panic and swore, and then tipped it all out to start again. And I thought, actually, it doesn't matter if I've spilt a quarter of a cup of milk formula.
That is so.
We can let it go.
Yeah. We make hot chocolate for boys sometimes in the morning, and we weigh one, and I often weigh Lucas as well, just out of habit. It's bizarre. But yeah, it'd be nice to not. That's what I think it would be. It would just be carefree, you know, no worries,
Brilliant.
peace of mind.
Thank you so much.
That's okay.
If you can say "run for type 1" to camera, that would be marvellous.
Yeah, please. Run for type 1.
Thank you very much.